What if a machine could decide who lives and who dies on the battlefield, all by itself? I know it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but it's not science fiction anymore. This is the very real world of lethal autonomous weapon systems, or as most people call them, killer robots. So today, we're going to break down this incredible and frankly, kind of scary technological revolution, and we'll be leaning on some key research from Marco Marsili to guide us. So let's just dive right in, shall we? This is the big question. Are these AI-powered machines, these killer robots, really the future of how wars are fought? And maybe the even bigger question is, if this is the future, do we have any control over where it's going? Okay, to really get a handle on how huge this is, you need to understand something. Military experts aren't looking at this as just, another new gadget or a faster missile. No way. The research is pretty clear on this. They see this as the third revolution in warfare. Think about that. The first was gunpowder, the second nuclear weapons, and now this. That's the scale we're talking about. It's a fundamental shift in, well, everything. All right, so let's break that down. What exactly is a lethal autonomous weapon system? Let's dig into the details because this is where you start to see why it's causing such a massive worldwide debate. So here's the absolute key phrase to lock onto: without direct human control. This is super important. We're not talking about your standard remote-controlled drone where there's a pilot sitting in a chair somewhere, making the final call. Nope. We're talking about a system that uses its own AI to find, identify, track, and, this is the big one, engage a target. It makes that final life-or-death decision all by itself. Now, it's really tempting to think of this as just an on-off switch, right? Either a human's in charge or a robot is. But it's not that simple. The reality is, well, it's a lot more of a sliding scale. And to really understand it, we have to look at something called the autonomy spectrum. And this framework you're seeing, it's pretty much essential to understanding this whole debate. Think of it like this. Way over on the left, you've got 100% human control, a soldier aiming a rifle. Simple. But as you slide to the right, the machine starts doing more and more on its own. First, it might just help the human aim. Then maybe it takes over a few tasks. And then you get all the way to the far right, and that's where you have these highly autonomous systems. They're making their own decisions in really complicated, messy situations. And that's the territory we're moving into. Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like in the real world with real military hardware that exists right now? Let's check out a couple of examples to make this super clear. All right, check this out. On one side, you've got something like the MQ-9 Reaper drone. Now, it can fly itself, it can search for targets on its own, but, and this is the key, a human operator is always in the loop. They make that final, critical call to fire. That's what people mean when they say meaningful human control. But then you look at something like the Israeli Harpy. That's way further down the spectrum. It's what's called a fire and forget system. You launch it, and its job is to go hunt for enemy radar systems and destroy them, completely on its own. No final okay from a person needed. And it's exactly these kinds of advanced systems that are pushing the envelope. They're forcing us to deal with these enormous ethical and legal questions, not as some far-off futuristic problem, but as something we have to figure out right here, right now. This whole thing really boils down to a massive clash of ideas, a real tug of war. On one side, you have the potential military benefits, and on the other, you have some really, really serious humanitarian and ethical risks. So the people who support developing these systems, their argument is that these machines could actually save lives. They could be more precise than a human, react in a split second, and you can send them into places that are way too dangerous for human soldiers. But the argument against them is pretty powerful. Critics are worried that we're taking the human element out of warfare, which is a scary thought. And what happens when a machine makes a mistake? Who's to blame? You could have this huge accountability gap, not to mention the terrifying risk of a machine misidentifying a target and causing a tragedy. And that brings us to a huge, huge problem: the law. We have these well-established rules for war, right? International Humanitarian Law. But the massive question is, can an algorithm, a piece of code, ever really follow those rules? See, at their very core, the laws of war rely on human judgment. They require a soldier to tell the difference between another soldier and a civilian. They require a commander to make a tough call. Is this military action worth the potential harm to innocent people? These are deeply human, nuanced decisions. And the critical question everyone is asking is, can you really program a machine to make those kinds of judgment calls in the absolute chaos of a battlefield?
I mean, just think about the amount of data one of these systems has to process. It's taking in information from all kinds of sensors. It's trying to guess what people are about to do, and it's supposed to apply these really abstract legal ideas, all in less than a second. Research shows that once you take a human out of that final decision-making loop, the risk of something going horribly, catastrophically wrong becomes a very real and central concern.
And because this is all so complicated and risky, the main group at the UN that's working on this, they've really focused on one single idea. It's that phrase we talked about before, meaningful human control. That concept has become the absolute cornerstone of the entire conversation about regulations. So, the technology is moving at lightning speed. Where does that leave the rest of us? Let's take a look at what might happen next, and this growing, urgent push to put some rules in place before this technology gets away from us. And if you want to understand just how serious this is at the highest levels, listen to this. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, put it very bluntly. He called machines capable of taking human lives without any human involvement morally repugnant. I mean, that's incredibly strong language, and it just shows you what the ethical stakes are here. So, how do you even begin to regulate this stuff? Well, there seems to be a general agreement on a three-step path. First, you've got to create some clear international rules on how this technology can even be used. Second, you have to build strict human oversight and accountability right into the design of these weapons from the get-go. And the endgame for a lot of people? A legally binding treaty. Something that could stop a full-blown autonomous arms race before it ever really starts. And really, that's what this all comes down to. We can talk about technology and strategy and law, but it all leads back to one single fundamental question. As this tech gets more and more advanced, we, all of us, have to decide, should we ever allow a machine, a piece of code, to make the final, irreversible decision to take a human life? That's the question we're all going to have to answer.